Hello my friends, welcome to today's video. Today's video is a surprise Sunday bonus video and it is going to be my January wrap-up. I'm so excited to talk about the books I read in January. I read so many awesome books, some of the best books I've read in years, and I'm so happy to have started the year off with a fantastic reading month. I haven't read this many books in a January ever. Before we get into it, make sure you are subscribed. You can follow me on my socials and my Goodreads down below. And without further ado, let's get into the video. In January, I finished 11 books. We're just gonna go in order. I'm gonna get right into it. First books I finished were the second and third book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. This was lent to me by a coworker of mine. I read the first book in December. I loved it. This one was actually my favorite of the whole trilogy. I rated this at 4.25 stars. I read the second book mostly in December but finished it in January, and then I read this whole one the first week of January. So the concept of the series is that there are 4 Londons, and Kel, who's Antari, which is like basically like really magical person, is able to travel between the Londons, and they used to be much more open and fluid and people could travel in between the Londons, but now only Antari can do that and there are only 2 of them. There's a lot of fun adventure and magic. I feel like the magic system in these was pretty straightforward, and it was just like super fun to read about. And I loved Kel. I loved all the characters. It kind of gave off Six of Crows vibes a little bit with like the group of characters, and my favorite part about these series was the characters. I've read Addie LaRue, that's the only other V.E. Schwab book I read, and I remember loving it but feeling like it was kind of slow, and I felt that way for these ones as well. The second book was definitely just like a setup for the third book, and the third book was really good, but it kept, I feel like there were like 5 or 6 times where they were doing something to like resolve the conflict and then it didn't work, and I feel like it didn't need to be as long as it was. But then I loved the way it ended, and I just loved all the characters, and they were pretty quick reads, so I definitely would recommend them if you're looking for a fun little fantasy trilogy that's really well written. I rated A Gathering of Shadows 4 stars, and I rated A Conjuring of Light also 4 stars. So those were the first 2 books I read in January. The next book I read in January was The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery. I saw some people talk about this book online, and I had read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It's by the same author, and I really enjoyed it, but a lot of the video game stuff in that book went over my head. But this one got such high praise, I thought I would try it out, and I'm so glad that I did. This was such a sweet little book. It's about a man who owns a bookstore off of the coast of Massachusetts somewhere, and one day this baby shows up in his bookstore, and he's widowed, he has no kids, and he's kind of like grumpy old man, but like part of this community, runs this bookshop, and the baby's left with a note that says, "Please take care of her, I want her to be raised around books." And it's just this beautiful story of like love and friendship and community and fatherhood, and it was so perfect and quaint. It's a super quick read, not a lot of pages, the font's not super big. If you're looking for a fun weekend read, I would totally recommend it. It gave off kind of Mitch Albom vibes, if you've ever read anything by Mitch Albom, just without the religious aspects and with more plot. But it was so beautiful. I really loved it. Didn't give me the 5-star feeling, but I did rate it a 4.75 stars, and I would 100% recommend it. The next book I read, which if you saw my reading vlog I posted a few weeks ago, I talked about this book in it, I'll link that in the cards, was Divine Rivals, and I hated it. Sorry to all you Divine Rivals fans out here, I did not like this book. I rated it a 2.5 stars. If you haven't heard of it, basically it's this magic fantasy world where these 2 people have these typewriters and they write notes to each other and slip it under the door, and then it shows up in another person's place, and so they're writing to each other. One of them knows who the other person is, but the other person doesn't know who he is, and then there's this whole like enemies to lovers plot. I won't give away too much, But basically my general opinion on this is that this story had so much potential. The concept is so cool, and I've never really read anything like that before. However, the world was super underdeveloped. There was like this war going on, and they would give us like bits and pieces and then like stop talking about it. If they both didn't know who each other were, then I think it would have been better. But this book had a lot of potential but did not deliver, and I would not recommend it. Yeah, 2.5 stars. The next book I read was my first 5-star read of the year. This book is called Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. As you can see, I tabbed in the book a little bit. I did lots of underlining, and this book was so perfect. I read Open Water by the same author last year. This is only his second book, and he's pretty young, I think, and he just has a way with words. Like, the way that he describes things is so beautiful. This book is about a young boy in this phase of life, like right after high school. He's not quite sure what he's gonna do next. It's the story of summertime, and he's like falling in love and being with his friends and dealing with family drama, and there was not a ton of plot, but the book moved in such a beautiful way, and it's not super long, and it just tells the story of this person that's just like a person. And I love books like that where there's a character that you can like see yourself in. And he was talking about like the feeling of like the end of being in high school, which I totally related to, and I like had felt recently when I finished college, like this ending of something you know was so good but you know you'll never get to have again, but there's like, you're on the precipice of like something new and exciting happening in your life. And it's about communities and how everybody finds their small worlds wherever they are, and how many different small worlds you have in your life. This is just a work of art. It is phenomenal, and you just have to take my word for it that Caleb Azuma Nelson is one of the best authors I've ever read. I will read anything he writes. I have to buy a copy of his other books so I can reread it and annotate it, because it's just like one of those books you want to like drink in and like soak in and enjoy. So anyway, as you can tell, absolutely love this book. Definitely one of my top favorite books. Must read. Next, I read 2 books for my video that I did where I was reading my highest rated book and my lowest rated book on my Goodreads TBR. So the first book that I finished was Death of an Author. It was a small ebook about I don't even remember what it was about. Basically the point of the book was that it was written by AI. The book was a little bit meta, talking about like what happens when AI takes over, and it was sort of a mystery, and I feel like the point of the book was not really like the plot, but more of like, this is what happens if you use AI to write a book. Interesting in concept, okay in execution, given that it was written by AI. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because it wasn't a great book. I rated it 3.5 stars, but it wasn't a horrible book, and it was kind of a cool concept. So kind of my meh book of the month. The other book I read for that was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a memoir by Chanel Miller, who was sexually assaulted, and this story is her sort of reclaiming her name, because as the story was breaking in the news and as her trial was going on, she was identified as Emily Doe, but she wasn't identified by her name, and she obviously went through so much, and this is her raw, unreal story. So major trigger warning here, but definitely I really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend it. I rated it 5 stars, and I think that it was just really beautifully written. She's a phenomenal author, and very powerful story. So my second 5-star read of the month. Next, I read 3 romance books for a video that's coming out on Wednesday. So I'm gonna fly through these reviews because I don't want to give too much away for the video. The first book I read was Love Theoretically. Super cringy. So cringy. I really wanted to like it because I've heard so much good stuff about Ali Hazelwood, but anyway. 3.5 stars, wouldn't recommend. The next one I read was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This one was cuter, still ditzy female main character, but she kicks ass at the end. And I liked the male main character in this one better than in Love Theoretically because he seemed more authentic. My one complaint is that this was written in both the male and the female perspective, and I feel like the male perspective just was like the female perspective. Like, he didn't really have his own voice in the writing, if that makes sense. But fun little romance. She's written a couple in this like universe, I think, so maybe I'll read it. I would consider reading another romance by her. I rated this one 3.75 stars. Last, I read The 7-Year Slip. This is the large print edition because that's all my library had. I rated this one also a 3.75 stars. It was fine. I feel like there was a lot that could have been developed that wasn't. The whole concept of this one is that she has this apartment that sometimes when she steps in, it goes 7 years back in the past. And they kind of explain like the logistics of it towards the end, but the whole time I was like, if she goes back 7 years in the past and somebody's there, but they both step out of the apartment, like they're both in their own timelines, it just like that sort of element of it didn't make much sense, and I had a hard time just like letting it be. But it was cute and I read it pretty fast. My general review on romances, unless it's Emily Henry, who I love, is that they're usually really cheesy, they usually read really quick. They're fun to read, but 3 in a row, I kind of felt like brain rot by the end. So if you are interested to see me talk about these as I read them and hear more of my opinions on them, make sure you're subscribed because I will be posting that video in a few days. So my last book of the month that I just finished last night, I'm filming this on February 1st, was Babel. Round of applause. Guys, this book changed my life. And honestly, I was so sure that this was going to be my favorite book of the month that I even wrote it in my bullet journal in my book bracket, and I have to like white it out so I can put this one in. And also, I've read 3 5-star books this month. This book has been on my list for over a year now. I knew that I would really enjoy it, but it was long and the font was really tiny, so I was a little bit intimidated by it, and I knew it was going to be a commitment. Let me just say, if you are thinking even remotely about reading this book, please read it. This is the most intelligent book I've ever read, and it's fantasy. It's so smart and it's so well crafted. And there's so much to it, but there's also such sweet characters and stories. I just have to say, R.F. Kuang is a genius. I will be reading the Poppy War trilogy now just because I need to read more of what she's written. The plot of this book is basically there is this school at Oxford. It's set in the 1800s, and there's this school at Oxford called Babel. It's a translation institute, and the students that study there learn about translation, they learn different languages, and they use that knowledge to create these silver bars, which is like the magic system. It's the fantasy element in this book. And the silver bars power stuff, like they can make a carriage go faster, they can make lights go on. And the way the bars are created is they have to find a match pair of a word in one language that translates in meaning to another language based on their roots. Basically, the only people that get to use the silver bars are the people that live in London and that are rich, pretty much. I don't know how to put in words how smart this book is. You just need to trust me that it's a super intelligent book, but it is not difficult to understand. It's written in an approachable way, and it's drawn out over a lot of the book so that you're learning things as you go, and it's just such a beautiful story about language and the origins of words and community and friendship, and you have to read this book. Trust me when I say that, like, I finished this last night and I've been thinking about it all day. I've been thinking about everybody in my life who I can text and recommend this book to. Guys, please, please, if you take anything away from this video, please, please read this book. Please. On that note, I am super happy with all of the reading I did in January. I'm super excited about reading more books in February. I'm so glad I'm finally out of my book slump from last year. I was reading such bad books last year. So we're moving on and up. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you read in January, what your favorite book was you read this month, what you want to read next month. If you want to see what I'm reading next month, you can click in the cards and I will link my February TBR video. I made a TBR jar to pick my books to read for February, which was really fun. So would love if you watched that video. If you've made it all this way, you definitely should subscribe, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. Bye, friends.